Welcome back to the African History Network show. I'm your host, Brother Michael M. Hotep. On the line, we have Professor Manu Ampim back on the African History Network show once again to talk about the Willie Lynch speech of 1712. Hotep, Professor Manu Ampim, how you doing tonight, brother?
Hotep, Brother Mike. I'm doing great, brother. Glad to be back to help destroy and bury another myth and create another funeral.
Absolutely, absolutely, brother. Okay, now can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. All right, now tell us the name of your book.
It's Death of the Willie Lynch Speech, Exposing the Myth. And
okay, go ahead.
So that's it. So it's a compilation of essays that I've been writing over the last handful of years to expose probably the greatest myths in the Western Hemisphere among black folks. And we have the subtitle Exposing the Myth because it actually exposed not only the fraudulent origins of this, which people call a letter, but it's supposed to be a speech. But not only that, but the alleged forgerer, his confession letter is also contained in the book as well.
Okay, we've talked about this some on the show before, but now your book is out. Previously, your book wasn't out. Now, a lot of people, because I talk to people across the country, I have the YouTube channel, and I've done a couple lectures dealing with the Willie Lynch speech and history leading up to it, things like this, man. And when I explain to people that the Willie Lynch speech is fraud, they look at me crazy. So how did you come to this realization that it's a fraud? Because, a lot of us found out about it in 1995, the meeting from Farrakhan, okay, and taken off since then. So how did you come to the realization that it's a fraud?
Well, as a professional historian, I've been trained in the tools and techniques of first-hand research. So I'm not a layperson who's just reading as just casual reading, but this is my field. This is my vocation. It's what I do in life. So I spent years learning the tools and techniques of first-hand research methodology, doing work in the libraries, in the archives, doing extensive research in museums and many places around the world, traveling to 19 countries and many places here in the U.S. to do first-hand research. But that was my training, to look at the field of Africana studies. And we spent quite a lot of time in looking at the history of black folks in the U.S. So when I saw this supposed Willie Lynch speech, it made no sense because it is inconsistent with the historical record. Plus, we know that documents, legitimate documents, don't just appear on the net. There's no reasonable person who thinks that way. We know that documents are contained in archives, maybe a family chest where they never really went through it to look at old letters and old documents. So when I saw it, I knew that it not only violated a lot of historical facts, and it made no sense, but also it just suddenly appeared on the net.
Right.
And so my training in first-hand research, it made it very clear to me, as many other professional historians, that this was just somebody in the late 20th century putting out a kind of an 8-page Ripley's Believe It or Not so-called document in order to wake us up, and it was nothing more than that. So it's pretty easy to go through it and to see and show that this is a really superficial attempt to move us forward. The problem with it is that even if somebody believes in some silly myth like that some slave owner in 1712 gave some guidelines on how to control black folks, there's nothing for black folks to do. So all we can do is sit back and just marvel at the great demigod status of some alleged British slave owner, and there's no agenda items to embrace. So when I saw it,
no way to combat it.
To combat it. So I put it in File 13 when I saw it some years ago, and I can't say when I first saw it, but it certainly alarmed many professionals when we saw that at the University of Missouri at St. Louis, a librarian posted it on their website, on their archives, their online resources, that's what really caused a great stir in 1993. And then when it was mentioned at the Million Man March, millions of people across the world had heard it for the first time. But I tell you one thing, without the Internet, and people being able to hit the forward button on email, there's no way this would have went out because it's such a superficial attempt to so-called wake us up that no reasonable person would have spent time photocopying this and sending it through the regular snail mail in the old days and wasting their time on such a a Mickey Mouse document. So that's why most historians don't take it serious, because it's really a kindergarten level approach, and it's unfortunate that people are not more critical in looking at information, being able to distinguish the real from the unreal. But people, instead of deal with evidence, they're more interested in ideology and propaganda and misleading the public. I say that we need to know the origins of anything in order to be able to solve it. You can't solve a problem without knowing the origins of a problem, and that's why it has become problematic for those people who want to promote myths, but then claim that they want to solve problems in the community, or one precludes the other. You can't believe in silly myths, in the origins of silly myths, and still claim that you're going to solve current problems, because you need to know how the problems originated and how they develop in order to really solve them. Every therapist knows that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like when I explain to people, it's like you get a Christmas gift on Christmas Day underneath the Christmas tree, and the child thinks Santa Claus brought the gift to them. So they want to go in search of Santa Claus and try to trace his route from the North Pole to their house. And how did he get in? Because we have a chimney. Now, the gift that you received is real, okay? But you're attributing a real, physical, tangible item to a false premise or false origin. Okay, so, and this is what's happening. Now, why do you think so many people across the country, because millions of people of African descent across the country know about the Willie Lynch speech, have heard about the Willie Lynch speech, read the Willie Lynch speech. I remember I got the parents have to make a sled. Okay, why do you so many of us believe the witch? This is real. This is what happened to us. What do you think happened?
Well, as my mentors say, they haven't read anything. And because they haven't read, then when this kind of Ripley's Believe It or Not so-called document is presented, they say, wow, this is shocking, and they just believe it because they never read it. So if people had read Ola de Equiano or read the great Frederick Douglass, if they had read David Walker, if they had read the abolitionists, if they read even those that were pro-slavery. See, if they had read Paul Finkelman defending slavery and all of the prominent sermons, prominent documents, prominent writings that promoted slavery in the 17 and 1800s, they would know that this more modern speech created in the 1970s does not conform to historical facts. So the fact that folks haven't read much of anything, they don't know what happened. They haven't read Kenneth Stamp. They haven't read Sterling Stuckey. They don't know about these authors. They haven't looked at any census reports. They have not read the autobiographical text of enslaved Africans. And because they have not read historians like Rosalind Terborg Penn, they haven't, read Bennett, Lerone Bennett. They haven't read
Lerone Jr.
They haven't read
Before the Mayflower, Lerone Bennett Jr. Yes.
Yeah, they haven't read any of this. So that's why anybody can float out a Mickey Mouse document, and if there's enough shocking content, then it's going to have an appeal. So like the website trutherfiction.com, they have some pretty interesting links that I would challenge the listeners to check out, because some of the links that they've had, I haven't checked it out in recent months, but one of the links is the anatomy of a myth. And one of the things we learn about these silly internet myths is there are common threads. And one of the common threads is that all of them have to have a wow factor. It's like, wow.
Yes.
I mean, it's like it's shocking facts immediately. Right. And there's always some prominent person involved. So it's like either Camille Cosby or Serena Williams or or Bill Gates or some shocking revelation about something. So it's a wow factor. There's a popular person involved. There's, and these things are, and also one other thing among a list of these common threads that link these silly urban myths together is the fact that you can't really truly trace this. It's like you can't pinpoint all of these things. So people get to a point that they don't have the research skills. They don't have the tools or the training to go to the archive and look at the original sources and check it out. So therefore they get to a point where they say that, well, I'm not really sure. And since I'm not sure, this might be true. I better send this out to my network. And that's how it works. So sometimes people get these silly these silly emails saying that you should send this out to 10 people you know because Bill Gates is doing some kind of beta test, and if you send it out, you're going to check. Well, see, nobody can really trace this stupid foolishness. So they say, you know what, it sounds strange, but then the brain starts making connections. Wait a minute, well, Bill Gates is in technology. We know Microsoft is everywhere. We know Bill Gates has a ton of money, so maybe it is true. I'm not sure. But if it is true, I want to make sure I get whatever's being offered, so let me send it out. And that's typically how a lot of people think. They're not sure. They can't verify because they don't have the skills to do it. Plus, the emails are so general that you can never trace it. So if we look at the Willie Lynch speech, the Willie Lynch, this mythical imaginary figure, he comes from a modest plantation in the West Indies, according to the fake speech. Mm-hmm. So what plantation? So there's no specific location. There's no specific island. There's no specific country. Just the West Indies. So
right.
So you can't trace it. You know, you can't trace it. There's no specific details. He never even identifies the alleged host of this speech. He's just talking about, I want to thank you, gentlemen. Well, what gentlemen? The man is very rude, really, when he doesn't really give specific details of honoring or at least respecting. If somebody knew anything about the 18th century, they know that people were they're more formal than that. They would name their host. They would specifically thank them, and not just some general comment about thanking some gentleman. What gentleman? You know, so it's like it's general enough where you can't really trace it. But not only that, but there's a lot of things in the speech that make no historical sense whatsoever, and I go through those details in the book in order to indicate that not only is there no evidence of a Willie Lynch giving a speech in Virginia in 1712, but also the tactics are not used either. The tactics to divide black people make no sense. Who in the world in the 1700s would be concerned with dividing black people in terms of tall versus short? This is absolutely this is a dumb 20th century concern where you have some women who are concerned with the alleged ideal mate of tall, dark, and handsome. So in other words, if he ain't 6 feet, then he's not even a candidate. This is modern, superficial 20th century, now 21st century thinking. In fact, they wouldn't be dividing somebody on color. The people are all African. They never divided anybody on divided male and female. But people say it ain't true because what they think is that if you can identify problems in 2013, they think because they can't do any research, they don't have the skills, that if anything is taking place today, it must have always been the same problems. And the problem with that official thinking is that people change, situations change, thinking change, and certainly the world changes. So what happens in the world today is not exactly what happened 20 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. There's been a dramatic change in the black community throughout the U.S. just since after World War II, when you have another wave of major migrations that took place. So these are things that a person who hasn't read anything wouldn't possibly know. But it is the most superficial thinking to assume that whatever is taking place today must have always been taking place in the country. This is absolutely silly and superficial, but that's where, brother, a large percentage of our people are. So it is just much easier to just believe something that's given to them rather than learn how to think critically.
Absolutely. And I tell people, if you read Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., or you read Destruction of Black Civilization by Dr. Chance Williams, this is nonsense. But, this type of thinking appeals to the same people who every Thursday night watch the Sally Hemings show on ABC and tweet about it. Oh, I'm sorry. That's called Scandal. I'm sorry, man. Excuse me. I'm sorry. But that's a whole nother that's a whole nother conversation. But let me ask you this. I remember in reading, because I read your essays dealing with this. We've talked about this before. You talked about how in the speech, it allegedly Willie Lynch says that there's a reference to colonies in the South. And you talk about how back at this time, you'd have states, you just had colonies. So they did not refer to southern colonies. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The brother that put together the fake speech, he, going by just general public information, had no idea that in the early 1700s, 1712 to be exact, there was no such region called the South. It was just 13 colonies. And a colony is simply a settlement, which is an extension of the home country. So these 13 colonies are still an extension of England. They were still under the authority of the king. And so there was no North or South. And in fact, it wasn't until after the American Revolutionary War, which ended in 1783, that after that time, some years after that, you begin to get a difference in the northern colonies and the former northern colonies and former southern colonies. Now, after the American Revolutionary War, now we have the United States that emerges.
Right.
So the northern states gradually began to develop differently as they industrialized, developed differently than the southern states. So you begin to have a split between the north and south, but this does not occur really into the 1800s. So this is 100 years after the Willie Lynch speech. So there's really no distinction very much among the colonies. This distinction between North and South develops after the country becomes independent and the northern states and southern states begin to drift apart as their regional differences begin to widen. So anybody talking about the South in the early 1700s is absolutely ignorant of the development of the colonies. There's no talking about the South. So this is how I can tell, as a trained historian, that the person only has surface and superficial knowledge at best, because he has a chronological problem when he's talking about the South. And in the speech, some reference to our illustrious King James. But what illustrious? James had been dead for about 100 years, so nobody in England would have known who King James were. They would have known the current Queen Anne. And in fact, there had been a number of British monarchs between the death of King James and then 100 years later when Queen Anne was in control at 1712. So here's a person who had to be of and from the black community, who knew that he made a reference to King James, and many black folks who were Christians would be affected by this emotional appeal to bring them in. And the other thing is that is really silly, because when I do surveys, like I did a talk on the Willie Lynch on my book at my college, Contra Costa College, a couple of weeks ago, we had a good turnout. It was over 200 people, and I asked the audience, who was the president of the United States 100 years ago? Now, out of this huge audience, we had one guy that knew, just one, just one. He correctly said it was Woodrow Wilson. I said,
Woodrow
very
Wilson.
Good.
Yep.
He knew that. He knew Woodrow Wilson, so he's done very well, but no one else knew that. In fact, why would anybody be concerned about who was the U.S. president 100 years ago? Nobody would know that. It's like nobody in England would know who was the king 100 years before. It's like somebody that obviously doesn't know anything. you know.
Right.
And it's clear to me that there's other contradictions as well that defy the historical record, that they're going to divide black people in terms of age. This is somebody clearly that doesn't know anything about the plantation. There was no dividing anybody on age. The fact today that elders are disrespected is something that has happened in the last 30 years or so. Before that, there was no elders, black community that were abused, that were disrespected. People showed the utmost respect, and we truly had elders, older people, but true in the community that were always. So the things that we're experiencing now, disrespect for young people and gangbangers and the attack and rape of our women, all of these are things that have emerged in the last several decades. And this is what people should know, is that after the 60s, the country changed dramatically. We start looking at the 70s and these time periods and start looking at the black family and what happened, then we can see a dramatic change that takes place in the late 60s and beyond. And not, we should never assume that things have always been that way, because that's not the case. So it's clear to me that the person who put it together was someone who actually came through the 60s and knew a little bit about it, because he can't even talk negative about black people in the speech. Anybody that's a slave owner or a slave trader in 1700s America certainly would have been using some derogatory terms, or at the very most he would have called them Negroes. But this person who put together the speech clearly had to do it after the 1960s. That's why I knew it was a late 20th century origin and not a speech from the 1712 period, because the person referred to people of African descent as black with a capital B to represent an ethnic indicator, and black to represent those of African descent with a capital B. This was not used in the history of this country on a wide-scale basis until June of 1966 with the emergence of the Black Power movement. So Brother Kwame Ture and Mukasa, these are the brothers that actually strategized to introduce the Black Power slogan into the movement. And once that was done, we now see 1966 as the birth of the Black Power movement. And then James Brown coming out later with his theme song, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud." But before that, if you call somebody black, that was like fighting words. People did not use black. They used colored, they used Negro. But black, even today, Webster and these other dictionaries, it is seen as a dirty term. So if people look in their dictionary right now, they'll see black is defined as dirty, wicked, sad, sullen, dismal, evil, all these negative terms, and that's how it has always been seen in America. And black folks, unfortunately, internalize this. Not every single person, but we can say the vast majority, so much so that it was not common, it was not chic, it was not in vogue for people to refer to themselves as black, and then particularly not to use B as a capital B for black, an ethnic indicator. So clearly the speech had to have been presented after 1966, after the emergence of the Black Power movement, because nobody in the white community would have been speaking about black folks in such positive terms. So it wasn't difficult at all for me as a trained historian to see when the speech was developed and who developed it as well. Who person that created this silly document.
Exactly. Just tuning in, we're speaking with Professor Manu Ampim. He's the author of a new book. It's Death to the Willie Lynch Speech, right? Death to the Willie Lynch Speech? Brother Professor Manu.
Yes.
Yeah, it's called
Death to the
Willie Lynch Speech. Yeah. The name of his new book is Death to the Willie Lynch Speech, Exposing the Myth, exposing a myth. And we're talking about how we know that the Willie Lynch speech of 1712 is a fraud. If you have a comment, give us a call. Area code 914-338-1375. 914-338-1375. Press the number 1 key to put you in queue so we can bring you on the air. Try to write down your questions so we can get through them quickly. We have a few minutes left in this segment here. And be sure to listen to the phone. Don't listen to the computer. Turn down the volume of your computer because the delay is from you off. To the 310 in just a minute, then to the Now, I know you also talked about, brother, in the past, we talked about how there are words in the Willie Lynch speech that are 20th century words, not 18th century words, like self-fueling, things of this nature. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, this is also curious features about the speech that the forger is using 20th century terms like refueling. This has to do with transportation and fuel. So clearly, we're talking about the auto industry and so forth. So we're talking really, the auto industry really doesn't have any foundation until the 20th century. So it's clearly no one in 1712 was going to be using terms like refueling and, as I indicate, using black with a capital B and foolproof. You know, these are terms that are fully of 20th century origin, and but that's all the person knew. And so, in fact, this is basically all the person knew. So he put together what he thought would go into a speech, and you know, so it was very clear that the person really hadn't done much research, and that wasn't the point of him putting it out there. He just thought that it's better to put out some kind of propaganda in order to quote unquote wake us up, and so he did not have the research tools and skills and ability. But he felt that putting out a leaflet would help circulate this information to the black community. But it's already clear that black folks have been struggling and suffering in America, so no one needed to be woken up to anything. One of the greatest wake-up calls that we can ever imagine is what happened with Hurricane Katrina, and not only the flooding of New Orleans, but the dislocation of an entire urban black community. We've never seen that in our lifetime, and probably will never see it on that scale again. So you talk about a wake-up call. What could be more dramatic than that? You know, so we don't need these documents leading people in directions that keep us confused, ignorant, and disoriented. We need to make sure people are intelligent. They have the ability to read, to analyze, and to act, to make the information actionable, go out and solve problems. No one's going to solve if they have no clue about where the origins of these problems came from. So the person who put it together clearly is thinking of a 20th century mindset, and all he basically knows. He doesn't know anything else because, again, he hadn't read very much.
Exactly. Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to the 310. Call, tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Yes, greetings. My name is Sadiki, and I've got a question, two questions for Professor Ampim. Thank you, Brother Michael.
Yes.
Professor Ampim, I just want to preface this by saying I appreciate all the ancestors.
Ampim.
Yes?
Manu Ampim.
Oh, excuse me, Professor Ampim. I appreciate the ancestors, the ones who have brought you here, the ones who you sat at their feet, all of your instructors, your parents, just anyone that brought you the kind of insight that you've that you have currently, and your capacity for brilliant analysis. I've heard you on several other programs talk about some of your teachers in the past, or some of your professors in the past, and the people who you were exposed to, so to speak. And just given that, I just really appreciate your analysis, because in a lot of ways, the Willie Lynch letter had done tremendous damage in the black community, because for those of us who felt it was a suspicious document, we came up against stiff resistance, and it wasn't until you formalized your initial responses in a part 1 and 2 that I was capable of, even if it was online and even if it wasn't an email, that I could actually send someone a document that spoke directly to it and broke it down using specific points, very strong, arguable points. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for that. The two questions, one is, what do you suggest, because I know you've traveled and you lecture specifically on your book now, what do you suggest that we do to continue to dismantle this legacy of the myth of the Willie Lynch letter? That's the first question. And the second question, if you would, I know this is...
Let's do the first question for the second.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, Brother Michael.
Go ahead, Manu.
Okay.
I appreciate the question, brother, and the positive feedback. Well, the first thing is that we know one who learns teaches. So we have to go out and teach and transform the others. We really have to use the Booker T. Washington model of the movable school, where he wasn't only concerned about the group of farmers that he was teaching new farming techniques and home economics to, but he was concerned that they would go out and teach and train others. And that's really what I would recommend, is to share information so that, and one thing I've advocated consistently now for the past 2 decades, we need more and more people to join our campaign to stop the spread of ignorance. In fact, we need a law passed, and we've made great progress in various countries about a new law to stop the spread of ignorance and have people arrested for the spreading crazy information. People dumb and just silly, because it's unnecessary and it's disrespectful to assume that we have to teach black folks kindergarten myths in order for them to understand. That's not the case at all. People are more intelligent than that. They just lack the training how to decipher, the myth and madness from historical reality. So we just need more people to join our campaign to stop the spread of this information virus that's out there. And my book is important because of the fact of not only how I've analyzed that, as you correctly say, brother, but also is the alleged forger. His confession letter is in the book. So when he read my, he said, "Damn, the brother got me." That's why he sent me the confession. That's exactly what he said. He said, "Damn, the brother got me," and he came forward to, announce that I had forced him to come out.
Powerful. There's an African proverb that says, if you know the beginning well, the end won't trouble you. And I just appreciate your being very persistent and dismantling the letter, which brings me to my second question, brother. You talked about information virus. I've heard you speak before as it relates to the notion that prostitution was the original profession. I know you have a brilliant analysis, and if you could briefly discuss your analysis as it relates to that, again, that myth. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big one. And as you know, that would take a while, but I would just say this, is that there's a group of dirty people who benefit from the misinformation that the first and oldest profession among women is prostitution. I wonder who made that up. That makes no sense whatsoever, because if we look at the original communities, the small stature people, the Mbuti, the Ife, the San, the Khoi, if we look at all these original groups, there was not and is not any prostitution. They don't have a word for the term or word for the act. And why would somebody be out prostituting themselves for what? What are they going to gain by that? This is absolutely silly. It's insane. In fact, people were gatherers. The women were gatherers before prostitution emerged in Europe as an institution. People were nurturers. They were mothers before prostitution even emerged in the world in Europe. And not only that, but these people have made baskets and pots. These are professions. So this oldest profession, this is nothing more than male-oriented propaganda that people benefit from financially, as well as uninformed women who follow this craziness because they don't know any better. And again, there's a lack of knowing. And because they don't know, they simply go by the weight of the propaganda. So if many people say that something is the case, they embrace it. So it is still a problem with a lack of knowledge and also a disrespect for the egalitarian social order that has emerged among the original people in the world, and they have to be respected. They're not pygmy. They're not bushmen and other silly terms. These are simply small Africans who taught us what it meant to be human. And their record is not only a record of the past, but it's also a current record, because even though in some cases the logging companies and others have encroached on their land, they still live their traditional lifestyles. So we don't have to guess or speculate. We can simply see their lifestyle today. And one of the, there's many documentaries. One I show in my class is Shadows in the Forest. It's dealing with the Mbuti who are in the Ituri rainforest, and the person would know. And this is why women can walk around bare-breasted and never be molested, because they're not looking at them as a sexual object. This is a Western idea. And so we have many things to do in order to reconstruct our historical memory of our experience. And so we need more people to join in this campaign to learn from professionals and not just the street talkers who run around lecturing, spreading silly nonsense. Because one of the things I know as a professional is that if professional scholars, professional historians, if we don't leave the tower as they call it, and go out and teach the community, then that will be a void for the street lecturers to come in and mislead the people. So that's why I have a foot in different arenas. So I can rub shoulders with the top thinkers and scholars, but I can't stay with them too long because the community also needs people that will help give correct guidance and not run around collecting coins as they lecture to keep their lifestyle going. So I'm like Chancellor Williams and others. If I made nothing lecturing, doesn't make any difference because I have a profession. So I don't have to go out and hustle somebody and spread stupid ideas that keep people and misoriented.
Keeps them enslaved, the stupid ideas. It keeps them enslaved.
There's no doubt. So there's nothing wrong with you, but there's nothing wrong with that. But when someone makes that their main priority, then we got a problem with it.
Right. Exactly. Okay, let's go quickly.